It was a rainy afternoon, and Emmanuel was bored. His parents were busy, leaving him to entertain himself. While rummaging through a pile of DVDs, he found one with an intriguing cover. The title was Chucky, and though he didn't know what it was about, the bright colors and strange doll on the cover caught his eye. Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to watch it. He'd never seen a horror film before, and he had no idea what he was in for. As the scenes played out, Emmanuel found himself glued to the screen, fascinated and horrified at once. The story of a possessed doll, one that looked innocent but held a dark and evil spirit, filled him with fear. His young mind struggled to separate reality from the frightening fantasy playing out in front of him. By the end of the movie, he felt a lingering unease, as if something had shifted in his mind. The story left an imprint on him, making him wonder if it was possible for ordinary, innocent things to hide something sinister. That night, lying in bed, Emmanuel couldn't stop thinking about the movie. Every creak, shadow, and whisper in the darkness made him imagine unseen forces lurking around him. He began to feel as if the events in the film could happen to anyone, even to him and his family. This idea took root, transforming into a small but persistent fear that he carried with him every day. And, being so young, he had no one to help him understand or dispel his worries. The movie's influence grew unchecked, and Emmanuel's worldview started to shift as he became increasingly suspicious of his surroundings. Not long after watching Chucky, Emmanuel's 4-year-old sister began having restless nights. She would wake up crying or talking in her sleep, her little voice echoing through the dark house and stirring Emmanuel from his own troubled sleep. At first, he thought nothing of it. She was, after all, just a child. But soon, his imagination began to turn her innocent nighttime murmurs into something eerie. The thought that something might have taken over her, like the doll in the movie, crept into his mind. The nights became a test of Emmanuel's nerves. Each time he heard her cries, a chill ran down his spine. When he saw her playing alone, speaking softly to her toys, he found himself watching her with suspicion rather than affection. Her laughter, once a source of joy, now seemed almost unnatural to him. His young mind, deeply affected by Chucky, was unable to grasp that his sister's actions were perfectly normal for her age. Instead, he saw them as signs of something dark and unknown, fueling his belief that she might be possessed. Each new day, Emmanuel's belief solidified. He became convinced that his sister wasn't herself anymore, that something sinister lurked within her. He noticed little things, a strange look, an unexpected giggle, or a sudden silence, and each one seemed to confirm his fears. Emmanuel found himself spiraling, his imagination turning his sister into a stranger, someone to be feared rather than loved. But his fear was something he bore alone, unsure of how to express it, or even if anyone would believe him. In his mind, the responsibility to save her weighed heavily as he became more isolated in his fears. The breaking point came one night. Emmanuel was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep, when his sister's laughter drifted down the hallway. It sounded strange, echoing in a way that made his heart race. His fear, which had been building quietly, exploded. He was now convinced that his sister was no longer his sister. The idea from Chucky had taken such deep root in his mind that he couldn't see the reality. He only saw a threat. In the darkness, he felt a surge of panic. Thoughts raced through his mind, urging him to act, to protect his family. He remembered how, in the movie, evil had to be confronted to be defeated. The fear inside him was overwhelming, consuming any remaining logic. He crept down the stairs, trembling, and entered the kitchen. His hands shook as he reached for a knife, clutching it tightly despite his small, unsteady grip. His young heart pounded with fear and misguided bravery. Emmanuel approached his sister, who was peacefully asleep, unaware of his presence. The moment was filled with silence, his mind clouded by a twisted sense of purpose. He believed he was saving her, saving them all, as he did the unthinkable. The commotion that followed shattered the quiet night. His parents rushed in, horrified by the scene before them, their world crumbling in an instant. Emmanuel, in his young innocence, couldn't comprehend the irreversible act he had just committed, driven by a tragic misunderstanding of reality. In the aftermath, Emmanuel's family was devastated. The incident left them grappling with a tidal wave of grief, shock, and guilt. The image of their son standing there, unaware of the horror he'd caused, was a haunting sight that would never leave them. His parents searched desperately for answers, for any sign that might have warned them of what was happening in Emmanuel's mind. Slowly, they began to piece together the events that led up to that night, uncovering the DVD and understanding the influence it had on him. They realized how deeply the horror film had affected him, but the revelation came too late. Their innocent boy had been twisted by fear, his mind poisoned by the inability to distinguish between fiction and reality. They blamed themselves for not monitoring what he had watched, not realizing that something as simple as a film could take such a dark toll. Guilt weighed heavily on them as they mourned their daughter, the family torn apart by a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The community, too, was shaken. The story spread quickly, sparking conversations about the impact of media on young minds. People questioned how such content could reach children and how important it was to guide them. Emmanuel's family became the face of this cautionary tale, sharing their experience in hopes that no other family would endure such pain. They advocated for better monitoring and awareness, hoping to spare others the grief that now marked their lives. Years passed, and Emmanuel grew older, though the memories remained. He underwent therapy, slowly coming to terms with the horror of his actions and the deep fear that had consumed him. With guidance, he began to understand the influence that Chucky had on him and the way his imagination had twisted reality. Through painful but healing sessions, he learned to separate fantasy from the real world, recognizing how easily a young mind could misinterpret fear. In the community, Emmanuel's story served as a warning. Schools and parents used it as an example of how deeply children can be affected by what they see and hear. Campaigns arose promoting awareness about the importance of age-appropriate media and open conversations with children. Emmanuel's family, forever changed, continued to share their story, determined to help others see the risks that media could pose to young, impressionable minds. The story's tragic lesson resonated deeply. Children are vulnerable to the images and ideas they encounter, especially when they can't distinguish between fiction and reality. Emmanuel's experience underscored the necessity of parental guidance and vigilance. His family's grief became a powerful reminder of how fear and misunderstanding can lead to devastating consequences, encouraging others to protect young minds from the haunting power of unchecked imagination.